On a secluded road deep in the heart of the Maine wilderness, a man named Arthur was heading home, his day winding down. Suddenly, a magnificent moose appeared. He stumbled upon a scene that defied everything he had ever believed. The moose was standing face to face with a bobcat. His first thought was familiar. A simple encounter, perhaps a territorial battle like so many he had witnessed before. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The wild creatures didn't attack, growl, or even flee. They simply stood there, sharing a moment that defied explanation. What Arthur discovered when he followed them into the woods would leave him, and anyone who heard his story, questioning everything they thought they knew about nature and reveal a secret too incredible to imagine. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The gravel crunched under the tires of Arthur Pendleton's aging Ford F-150, a familiar, comforting sound that marked the final mile of his journey home. At 78, Arthur's world had contracted to these simple, reliable rhythms. The drive into the small town of Northwood, Maine, for supplies. The familiar faces at the general store who still called him Mr. Pendleton, and the slow, winding return to the house he'd built with his own hands half a century ago. The woods, thick with pine and birch, pressed in on either side of the narrow road, their shadows lengthening in the wan, late-afternoon light of October. He rounded the last bend, his thoughts on the simple pleasure of a hot cup of tea and the crossword puzzle waiting on his kitchen table. That's when he saw her. A colossal shape stood resolute in the middle of the road, as immovable and gray as a granite boulder. A cow moose. She wasn't just large, she was magnificent, her head held high, her dark, liquid eyes surveying the world with a placid indifference that bordered on regal. Arthur sighed, pulling the truck to a gentle stop about 50 yards away. This was a common enough occurrence, a moose jam, as the locals called it. You just had to wait them out. Patience was a currency you learned to mint in these parts. He settled back in his seat, the worn leather groaning in protest. He watched the moose, her ears swiveling like furry radar dishes, catching sounds he couldn't perceive. He was about to reach for the thermos of lukewarm coffee on the passenger seat when a flicker of movement at the edge of the woods caught his eye. It was low to the ground, a fluid ripple of tawny spotted fur. A bobcat. Arthur's hand froze mid-air. His heart, a steady, reliable old drum, gave a surprisingly sharp thud against his ribs. Now this was different. He'd seen moose his whole life. He'd seen bobcats too, but usually as fleeting glimpses, a disappearing tail, a pair of tufted ears vanishing into the undergrowth. He'd never seen the two together, certainly not out in the open like this. The bobcat emerged fully from the tree line, its movements a masterpiece of condensed power. It was a healthy specimen, muscular and sleek, its gaze fixed intently on the moose. It took a few slow, deliberate steps forward, placing each paw with silent precision. Arthur's mind, conditioned by decades of living alongside nature and countless hours watching wildlife documentaries, leaped to the only logical conclusion. A standoff. A confrontation. He knew a bobcat was no match for a full-grown moose in a direct fight. It would be suicide. But animals, especially mothers, could be driven by desperation or a fierce territorial instinct that defied logic. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He felt like an unwilling spectator at a gladiatorial contest. The forest had suddenly become an arena, and he was trapped in the front row. He braced himself for the inevitable explosion of violence. The moose's powerful charge, the bobcat's desperate snarling leap, a brief, brutal flurry of hooves and claws. It was the law of the wild, read in tooth and claw, a truth as old as the mountains that loomed on the horizon. But the explosion never came. The bobcat stopped about 10 feet from the moose. There was no hiss, no bared teeth. Its tail gave a slow, almost thoughtful twitch. The moose, for her part, didn't stomp or snort a warning. She simply stood her ground, her gaze soft, her massive body relaxed. A strange, electric stillness settled over the scene. A silence so profound that Arthur could hear the faint whisper of the wind through the pine needles. They just looked at each other. It wasn't the tense watchfulness of predator and prey. It was something else entirely, something he couldn't decipher. It felt like a shared moment, a pause in the world's frantic spin. Arthur's breath fogged the cold windshield. He was so captivated he forgot all about his tea, his crossword, the ache in his lower back. Time seemed to stretch, pulling taut like a thread. Then, the moose did something that shattered every assumption Arthur held about the natural world. She lowered her immense head, a slow, graceful arc of her long neck. The movement was gentle, deliberate, devoid of any threat. She took a soft step forward, then another. The bobcat didn't flinch. It held its ground, watching the approaching giant with an unnerving calm. The moose brought her head down further until her large, velvety nose, as soft-looking as moss, was level with the cat's face. She extended her nose and gently, impossibly, nudged the bobcat's cheek. Arthur let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It came out as a shaky, audible gasp, a nudge, a friendly, affectionate greeting. The bobcat, in turn, leaned into the touch for a fraction of a second, its eyes closing briefly before rubbing its own cheek against the moose's muzzle. It was a gesture he'd seen his wife Eleanor's house cat do 1,000 times, a sign of trust and familiarity. But this wasn't a pampered tabby in a warm kitchen. This was a wild bobcat and a moose. Two creatures whose paths should only cross in conflict or avoidance, standing nose to nose in the middle of a deserted road as if they were the oldest and dearest of friends. They stood like that for a long moment, two unlikely statues silhouetted against the fading light, seemingly locked in a conversation for which there were no words. Then, as if by some silent agreement, the moose lifted her head and turned. She ambled toward the side of the road from which the bobcat had emerged. The bobcat fell into step just behind her, moving with a familiar ease, its shorter stride a quick, rhythmic counterpoint to the moose's languid gait. Together, they disappeared into the shadows of the forest. The road was empty again. The world was quiet. But for Arthur, everything had changed. The silence that remained was not empty, but full of questions. He sat in his truck for a full 5 minutes, the engine idling, his mind reeling. He felt a profound, unshakable curiosity, a pull stronger than any he had felt in years. It was the same feeling that had led him as a boy to explore every creek and hollow in these woods. He couldn't just drive away. He couldn't go home and wonder. He had to know. Making a decision that his late wife would have called both foolish and entirely predictable, Arthur put the truck in park, killed the engine, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his glove compartment. He slipped his smartphone into his pocket, a concession to the modern world he rarely used for more than calling his daughter. He stepped out into the crisp, cold air, his boots sinking slightly into the soft shoulder of the road. He stood at the edge of the woods, at the very spot where the two strange companions had vanished. He took a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs, and followed them in. The forest floor was a thick carpet of fallen leaves that muffled his footsteps. The light under the canopy was dim, a world of deep greens and browns. Arthur moved slowly, his eyes scanning the undergrowth, his ears straining. He was no stranger to the woods, but he felt a sense of trespass, of entering a private, sacred space. He followed the most obvious path, marked by the moose's large, distinct tracks and the surprisingly clear trail she left in her wake. He walked for what felt like 10 minutes, deeper and deeper into the woods, the sound of the road fading completely behind him. He began to worry he'd lost them, that the mystery would remain unsolved. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was a soft, playful squeak, followed by a clumsy bleat. Arthur froze, his hand tightening on the flashlight. He crept forward, using the broad trunk of an ancient oak for cover. He peered around the side and his jaw went slack. Before him was a small, sheltered glade, a natural clearing where the sunlight, now a deep gold, pierced the canopy in dusty shafts. And in the center of this sun-dappled stage was a scene of such impossible charm that Arthur wondered if the solitude had finally made him lose his mind. The mother moose stood sentinel at the far end of the glade, placidly stripping leaves from a young birch tree. Near her, the mother bobcat was stretched out on a sun-warmed patch of moss, her eyes half closed in a picture of lazy contentment. And frolicking between them was their audience, the reason for this unbelievable alliance. A moose calf, all gangly legs and oversized ears, wobbled on unsteady hooves. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, still bearing the lighter coat of infancy. And tumbling around its legs, batting at the dangling tuft of its bell, were 3 bobcat kittens. They were tiny balls of fluff, miniatures of their mother, their movements full of the clumsy, over-caffeinated energy of the very young. One kitten would stalk the calf's leg, its rump wiggling, before launching a pounce that would end in a soft tumble into the leaves. The moose calf would lower its head, its big, curious eyes watching the tiny predator with an air of gentle confusion. It would nudge the kitten with its nose, a perfect imitation of its mother's earlier gesture, causing the kitten to roll over and bat at its snout with unsheathed, harmless claws. Another kitten was trying to climb the calf's leg as if it were a furry tree, its tiny claws making no purchase on the thick hide. The calf simply stood there, occasionally shifting its weight, seemingly enjoying the odd massage. It was a nursery, a cooperative, interspecies nursery. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. The raw, untamed wildness he had expected to see had been replaced by a scene of pure, unadulterated innocence. These babies, oblivious to the rules that said they should be enemies, were simply playing. They were family. He slowly, carefully, pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled to open the camera app. He felt like an intruder, a spy in this secret Eden, but he knew he had to capture it. No one would ever believe him. He wouldn't have believed it himself if he weren't seeing it with his own eyes. He filmed for several minutes, zooming in on the kitten's antics, the calf's patient demeanor, and the 2 mothers watching over their blended brood with a shared, silent understanding. The look that passed between the moose and the bobcat was one of mutual guardianship, a pact forged in the deep, unspoken language of motherhood. A wave of emotion washed over Arthur, so powerful it made his eyes burn. He thought of Eleanor, of raising their own daughter, Sarah. He remembered the fierce, protective love they had shared, the way they had created a safe harbor for her against the storms of the world. What he was witnessing was no different. It was the universal sacred duty of a parent, manifesting in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Not wanting to disturb the peace any longer, he quietly backed away, his heart full to bursting. He made his way back through the darkening woods, the golden scene seared into his memory. When he reached his truck, he sat for a long time, the video playing on a loop on his phone's small screen. It was real. It had happened. Driving the final stretch home, his mind was a whirlwind. The crossword puzzle and the hot tea seemed trivial now. He had stumbled upon a miracle, a secret whispered in the heart of the forest. When he got inside his quiet, empty house, the silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, but the silence of reverence. He made his tea, but he couldn't focus on the newspaper. He kept rewatching the video, the image of a tiny kitten batting at a giant moose's nose. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. This wasn't just a quirky anecdote to share at the general store. This felt important. It felt like a discovery. And there was only one person he knew who might understand, who wouldn't just dismiss it as a tall tale from an old man. He opened his laptop, the keys dusty from disuse, and pulled up his email. He searched for a name he hadn't typed in years. Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a wildlife biologist who had conducted a study on black bear populations on his land about a decade ago. She had been sharp, passionate, and respectful of his knowledge of the woods. He remembered their long conversations about animal behavior. She had been the one who told him that nature was full of surprises, that we had only scratched the surface of its complexities. He began to type, his fingers slow and deliberate. Subject: a site in the Northwood Forest you won't believe. Dear Dr. Sharma,
my name is Arthur Pendleton. I'm not sure if you remember me, but you conducted a study on my property about 10 years back. I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to you because I saw something today that I can't explain. I know how this will sound, but I have to tell someone who might take it seriously. This evening, on my drive home, I saw a mother moose and a mother bobcat together. I expected a fight, but they were friendly, affectionate even. I followed them into the woods, and what I found there, I have on video. It was a moose calf and 3 bobcat kittens. They were playing together. The mothers were watching over them like a single family. I have never in my 78 years seen anything like it. I know it's a lot to ask, but the sight has affected me deeply. I thought of what you said all those years ago, about nature's surprises. Well, I think I've found the biggest one of my life. I've attached a short clip from the video I took. Sincerely, Arthur Pendleton.
He attached the file, his finger hovering over the send button. For a moment, he hesitated. Was he making a fool of himself? But the image of the glade, of that impossible family, gave him courage. He clicked send. He shut the laptop and stared out the window into the deep, impenetrable blackness of the forest. Somewhere out there, under the cold light of the stars, a moose and a bobcat were standing guard over their children. Together. Arthur slept fitfully, the strange and beautiful images from the glade replaying in his dreams. He woke early, a nervous energy thrumming through him. He checked his email first thing, but there was no reply. A pang of disappointment hit him. Maybe she thought he was a crackpot. Maybe the email had gone to a spam folder lost in the digital ether. He went about his morning chores, feeding the birds, chopping some kindling for the wood stove. The day felt ordinary, which was a stark contrast to the extraordinary secret he was now carrying. Around 10 o'clock, just as he was convincing himself he'd imagined the whole thing, a new-looking Subaru Outback, a car far too clean for these muddy roads, pulled into his driveway. A woman emerged from the driver's side. She was older than he remembered, with a few distinguished streaks of gray in her dark hair, but her eyes had the same bright, intelligent spark. It was Dr. Anya Sharma.
Arthur?
She called out, a wide, incredulous smile on her face.
I hope you don't mind. Your email? I was at the university's research station just an hour south of here. I had to come.
Arthur's heart leaped with relief and vindication.
Dr. Sharma, it's good to see you. Please, come in.
He led her into the kitchen, the same room where they had once spread out maps and tracking data. He poured her a cup of coffee, his hands steady now.
Arthur,
she said, getting straight to the point, her voice brimming with excitement.
the video. I've watched it 20 times. I've already forwarded it to 2 of my most trusted colleagues, and they are as stunned as I am. In all my years, in all the literature I have ever read, this is unheard of.
So I'm not crazy,
Arthur said, a faint smile touching his lips.
No, you're not crazy.
She laughed.
You're a witness. What you found could be a landmark observation in behavioral ecology. Can you tell me everything? Every single detail from the moment you saw them?
Arthur recounted the entire experience, from the moose on the road to the gentle nudge, from his decision to follow them to the magical scene in the glade. Anya listened intently, nodding, her pen flying across a notepad she'd pulled from her bag. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, a look of profound wonder on her face.
It's a form of symbiosis, clearly.
She mused, more to herself than to him.
Specifically, mutualism, a relationship where both parties benefit. But the circumstances that would lead to this, they must be incredibly specific and incredibly rare.
She leaned forward again, her eyes locking on his.
Think, Arthur. Has there been anything unusual in the area lately? A drop in prey? A new predator?
Arthur thought for a long moment, sifting through the recent history of the woods he knew so well.
The black bears have been more aggressive this year,
He said slowly.
Old Man Hemlock, down the road, lost 2 of his sheep last month. Said it was a big male bear, bold as brass. And there was that forest fire over on the West Ridge back in late spring. Burned a huge swath of territory.
Anya's eyes lit up.
That's it. That could be the catalyst. A large, aggressive predator can change everything. A bobcat is fierce, but she's no match for a bear that's determined to get to her kittens. And a moose, while powerful, is still vulnerable, especially a mother with a young calf. Bears are notorious for preying on moose calves.
She started pacing the small kitchen, her mind working at high speed.
Let's build a hypothetical, Arthur. Let's say our mother moose lost a previous calf to this bear. She's traumatized, hypervigilant. And let's say our bobcat lost her mate, or maybe had her den discovered by the same bear. She's a single mother, pushed to the edge, needing to hunt but terrified to leave her kittens undefended.
She stopped and looked at him.
What if they found each other in a moment of shared threat? What if the bear was approaching, and the moose, in a moment of protective instinct, stood her ground not just for her calf, but for the kittens as well? She provides the brawn, the sheer size and power to deter a large predator. A bear might think twice before tangling with a furious 800-pound mother moose.
And the bobcat?
Arthur asked, completely engrossed.
The bobcat provides a different kind of protection,
Anya explained.
She has superior senses. Her hearing and eyesight for small, stealthy movements are phenomenal. She can detect a threat, a weasel, a fisher cat, even a large hawk that might snatch a kitten or harass the calf, long before the moose can. She's the early warning system. Furthermore, she's a much more efficient hunter of small game. She can provide food, perhaps even sharing kills, in a way that benefits the entire group's ability to remain hidden and safe in one location. They are covering each other's weaknesses. It's a strategic alliance born from shared trauma and a common goal, keeping their children alive.
The word trauma struck a chord deep within Arthur. He thought of his own life after Eleanor passed. The world had seemed a hostile, threatening place. He had retreated, become hyper-vigilant in his own way. He had needed his daughter, Sarah, and she had needed him. They had formed their own alliance, covering each other's weaknesses in the face of grief.
It makes a heartbreaking kind of sense,
Arthur said softly.
It's more than sense. It's beautiful.
Anya said, her voice full of awe.
It demonstrates a level of social intelligence and emotional capacity in these animals that we are only just beginning to understand. This isn't just instinct. This is a choice, a partnership.
She looked at him, her expression serious.
Arthur, would you be willing to take me there? To the glade? We would have to be incredibly careful. The last thing we want to do is disturb them and break this fragile bond.
A fierce, protective feeling swelled in Arthur's chest. These weren't just animals anymore. They were his secret family.
I'll take you,
he said.
But we do it my way, from a distance. We don't let them know we're there.
Agreed,
Anya said, her smile returning.
You're the expert in these woods.
Late that afternoon, they set off. Arthur led Anya along the same path he had taken the day before. He moved with a woodsman's quiet confidence, pointing out a deer scrape here, the track of a fox there. Anya followed, her scientific mind absorbing every detail of the ecosystem that had produced such a marvel. When they neared the glade, Arthur held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. He pointed to a rocky outcrop about 100 yards away, overgrown with moss and ferns. It offered a perfect, concealed vantage point. They crawled the last few feet, settling in behind a screen of foliage. The scene was just as he'd left it. The two mothers were present, ever watchful. The calf and kittens were engaged in another round of their strange, gentle game. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the glade in hues of orange and deep purple. Anya raised a pair of binoculars to her eyes, a soft gasp escaping her lips.
Incredible,
she whispered.
It's stable. This wasn't a one-time event.
They watched in silent reverence for nearly an hour. They saw the bobcat suddenly go rigid, her ears swiveling towards a dense thicket. Instantly, the moose stopped chewing and lifted her head, her body tensing into a fortress of muscle. She took a step, positioning herself to shield her calf, who immediately huddled close to her leg. The kittens, sensing the shift in their mother's demeanor, scurried to the base of a large pine tree, vanishing into the shadows. The entire unit had moved with the drilled precision of a military squad. It was the symbiosis Anya had described, playing out in real time. After a tense minute, the bobcat relaxed, letting out a soft chuff. The moose's shoulders visibly sagged in relief. The danger, whatever it was, had passed. The kittens slowly re-emerged, and the fragile peace of the glade was restored. Anya lowered her binoculars, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
This is the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed.
she said, her voice thick with emotion. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting a final, glorious light upon the scene, Arthur felt a sense of peace settle over him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. His crushing loneliness, a constant companion since Eleanor's passing, seemed to lift. He was no longer just an old man in an empty house. He was a guardian, a keeper of a sacred secret. He had found a family in the most unexpected of places. He looked at Anya, whose face was illuminated with the joy of pure discovery. Her work would document this, share it with the world in a way that respected the animal's sanctity. It would change things, challenge assumptions, and open hearts and minds.
What started as a heartbreaking story of loss for these two mothers,
Anya said softly, as if reading his thoughts,
has become a heartwarming story of survival, of finding family in the face of adversity.
Arthur nodded, his gaze returning to the glade where the moose calf was now lying down to rest, and a tiny bobcat kitten had curled up against the warmth of its flank. The heart-wrenching fear he had first felt on the road had been replaced by a profound and enduring warmth. He had expected to see a fight, a brutal display of nature's law. Instead, he had found its grace. He had found proof that even in the wildest of hearts, in the deepest of woods, the most powerful instinct of all was not to fight, but to protect, to nurture, and to love. And that, he knew, was a story no one could believe, but one he would carry with him for the rest of his days.